things like the Levada Center or any reasonable organization that might have given us a slightly less interfered with number, I think have all been shut down or severely censored at this point. But a lot of people emphasize that, yes, a lot of Russians perhaps are opposed to this war, but a lot of very pro-Ukrainian voices will argue that most Russians are pro it because they haven't done enough to stop it. But I think that shows a misunderstanding or lack of understanding of just how entrenched the system is and the risks that are associated with showing any resistance. Where do you sit on this sort of debate?
Yeah, I mean, it is exceedingly difficult to know quite what the Russians are feeling and thinking. And therefore, yes, there is this scope for everyone to decide what they actually think. I must admit, I am, like you, very skeptical about the idea that we can say that the Russians are supportive of this war because they're not protesting in large enough numbers. This is, as I say, a thuggish police state in which what you do doesn't just simply potentially have terrible impact on you, but also on your family. And I think, again, people will generally be making assessments based on whether they think the protest is going to lead anywhere. If it's just futile, and I think this is one of the successes of the regime, is to convince people that protest is futile, then what's the point? You just focus on just looking after yourself and your family. And there is also, I think it's worth noting, a considerable degree of just natural patriotism. You may not have wanted this war, but if your country is in a war, you'd rather it win the war rather than lose it. And that is a reason, or for some people, a pretext for not protesting right now. You think, well, look, we're all in this together. Let's just kind of see what happens. All that said, yeah, I mean, I think that it's very hard to trust any of the actual opinion polling data that we do still have. If only we had access to the opinion polling data that the Kremlin has, because government is still the single largest consumer of Russian polling data. But on the other hand, we can see trends. There's this odd thing about Putin's sky-high approval ratings. I mean, it was once in the 80%. Now, clearly, it has fallen. According to some, it's only just over 50%. Now, look, by the standards of any Western politician, a 50% approval rating is something that they will be absolutely delighted with. Absolutely, quite. But on the other hand, it's an environment where there is no opposition, there is no alternative. And for me, the fascinating thing has always been that we've seen these high approval ratings for Putin, but also relatively low trust ratings. His trust ratings tend to bump in the 30%. And especially in the days of 80% approval, that raised an interesting conundrum. How come? Is it that Russians approve of someone who they think lies to them? What's going on here? And I think part of the answer is that effectively there are two Putins. There is Putin, who's become the avatar, the icon of the country. And therefore, being asked, do you approve of Putin, is in some ways being asked, are you a patriot or something? And then there's Putin, the politician, Putin, the person who actually enacts policies on which you could have specific practical opinions. Because the interesting thing is Putin's trust levels tend to map quite closely across to the United Russia Party's also ratings as well. So in other words, the main political bloc supporting him. So in some ways, I think this is it. Putin's approval ratings, they don't really mean that much, but they are absolutely declining. I think one can clearly say that. And in any case, they are artificially high because they just simply represent the fact that Putin has been, after all, there are many Russians who have not experienced life except under Putin, and therefore he has become this kind of almost symbolic figure as well as actual a human being.
Yeah.